I would like to shift this question of authenticity.
Wait, I don't want to leave this question.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Eric.
I think one thing Bruce doesn't get enough credit for, which is odd because so many people are in the business of giving Bruce credit, is the enormous variety of sources upon which he draws. I mean, you can find James Brown in Bruce, you can find Dylan in Bruce, you can find Elvis in Bruce, you can find Hank Williams in Bruce. Lately you can find these Celtic, whatever they are, guys in Bruce. Lately he's been branching out a little bit into hip hop. Lately you can find the Clash in Bruce, and I can't think of another artist who draws on all these various traditions, not just the country tradition and the soul tradition, but so many traditions simultaneously. And it is an interesting question as to why his audience is so damn white. It's pretty male. It's not that male. It's not like at an Allman Brothers show, but it's pretty white male. And I think that's because of who he was when he became popular the first three times: Born to Run, Darkness, and Born in the U.S.A. And people have just moved on and stopped paying attention, and also because the energy in popular music is in hip hop now. It's not in rock. Mm-hmm. But it is a little weird because he does perform these, at the Apollo show and that the Sam and Dave stuff. It's perfectly credible, and he clearly loves the stuff.
Yeah. And
he is, putting people of color on stage. So it is a question. I would like to see somebody do some real work and address that with some data.
Yeah,
I think it's a bigger question than just Bruce Springsteen, like Jeff was alluding to. I think it says something about our culture.
And also the moment. I mean, if you think about, that mid-decade moment in the 1970s where, it's down to Clarence as the only African-American on stage. That's one more African-American than most bands had in the second half of the 70s. Straight up rock and roll bands. And there was that hope of the integrated moment of the first half of the decade that I think Bruce really embraced and helped push with the early versions of his bands.
Mm-hmm. And if he'd had his druthers in 1974, the band would have stayed half black because he didn't want David Sanchez and Boom Carter to leave the band. I mean, that was a crushing thing. I mean, I think he wasn't sorry that he ended up with Max Weinberg and Roy Bittan, but I mean, I think that was very important. I think it was somewhat controversial and counter-careerist to have a black saxophone player in 1973.
Well, and to be leaning on a album cover.
Because the radio programmers, you see that black face on the record cover, and it's like, wait a minute, what kind of band is this? Is this? I guess this isn't a rock and roll band, And so, that's always been something that I think he's been very deliberate about. I mean, going back to the Bruce Springsteen band again, which was like a big James Brown style review, and that's he learned to base his stage act on James Brown from the Tammy Show. He watched that segment with James Brown dozens of times and sat there
like
and
Mick Jagger.
I'm sorry?
Just like Mick Jagger did.
Exactly. Yeah. And stood up and developed his moves, in the empty theater while he was watching that with his buddy who managed the theater.
Well, I think Eric made an interesting point too about who he was when he became popular, and of course it did happen 3 times, and then sort of most massively with the Born in the U.S.A. era. And I wonder why you guys think that was that a conscious effort to appeal to white working class America on the part of him and John Landau? Was that clever marketing, or was it something about the cultural zeitgeist of that moment in 80s America? What do you guys think?
Well, it depends what you're talking about. I think Born in the USA was obviously, no question, self-conscious marketing, although it wasn't so much an attempt to appeal to white working class America as it was to portray himself as a part of white working class America and appeal to lots of different kinds of people on the basis of that image, an alternative both to the androgyny of Michael Jackson and the horrificness of Ronald Reagan. I'm more interested in what we started talking about earlier, what I raised in the beginning, which is the transition from Born to Run, which I would put in the category of I would say the first Bruce period ends with that, and then moving into Darkness, Nebraska, and The River, where the persona is redefined in much more adult terms, but also very deeply into this working class culture, which I hadn't really noticed as being part of who Bruce was. I mean, not centrally anyway. And again, as a teenager, listening to the music, and it actually, I grew up in the suburbs, relatively well-to-do, and it really helped educate me and influence me and get me, thinking and reading about these issues. So I wonder how. I mean, again, clearly, it came from a real place. It came from his whole life, but it also was a very self-conscious commercial move, and I'm wondering to what degree that was calculated, to what degree John Landau thought that was a good idea.
You think it was a self-consciously commercial move even back then in '78 when he adopted
No, I'm not saying, I'm saying, look, you work with what you have. Mm-hmm. So Landau said, okay, this is what we have. Let's turn it into something bigger than it otherwise would have been. But I'm wondering the percentage of those two things.
Well, and the other question is, Springsteen is nothing if not a product of his time. He's always integrally plugged into the current zeitgeist. And Jeff, maybe you can speak to the environment in the '70s and what maybe moved him in that direction, aside from his personal struggles with the legal struggles with his management. But what do you think sort of pushed him in that direction?
Well, I think I'm thinking a little bit about what Eric just said too, and that Rust Belt trilogy, going from Darkness to Nebraska, is again rooted in place and rooted in the reality of that period. And Nebraska is the quintessential statement. I think it's the greatest statement about Reaganism ever recorded and possibly even written. But and also gives Bruce the cred to be able to make Born in the USA, right? I couldn't have swallowed Born in the USA if Nebraska had not existed. Watching the frat boys drive around campus, listening to Born in the USA was much more palatable with Nebraska. But what's interesting about, and I'm back to Bruce's art and this moment, is that he's using reality. The reality of working class life with plant shutdowns, post-Vietnam, stagflation, the whole thing. But it works also as metaphor. So suburban young Eric Alterman, this makes sense because it's existentially meaningful. But it also made sense to me because oh yeah, I got to get out of this dump because where I live sucks. And I think the genius of Bruce is that both of those things work together. That it's both a piece of reportage of the moment as well as a higher calling to who we are as individuals and as a collective.
I think that's
I actually don't see. I'm sorry.
Say again.
What a beautiful closing statement.
I think the irony there is that I don't think that that Nebraska is a particularly political record, or wasn't intended to be. To him, it's it's his autobiography. It's his creepy, all the sort of horrific things that happened to him when he was a little kid, and the experience of growing up in a home, that not only was close to being impoverished, but was led by a guy with undiagnosed and untreated mental illness, and exactly how surreal and weird, that whole experience was, and so a lot of that, fits into the whole moment of, that first blush of Reaganism in the early 80s, but in a weird way, even though there's a lot of very, sort of ripped from the headlines type of scenarios, in Atlantic City and, and those people who are, basically hurled from the social safety net. I think 90% of what was on his mind was his own kind of tortured soul and where that came from.
So we are coming to a close here, but I did want to throw out, just in regards to this question of authenticity, where is it? In Jack of All Trades, he says something about the banker man grows fat and the working man grows thin, and he does seem to level some criticism against capitalism itself. Dare I say? I'm not sure if he would go that far, but. Is there any hypocrisy in that type of criticism where, I mean, he pulled down $80 million last year.
Rich man in a poor man's shirt. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so is that a fair criticism, or is that expecting too much from
Well, I think since none of us ever are hypocritical in any way in our lives, we're all in perfect position to criticize Bruce for not being the person we think he should be.
Yeah,
I don't think it's an interesting question. I think the question is about the art and about the social meaning. Who the guy actually is and what he does with his life is really... I mean, Peter's book is great if you're curious, and believe me, I'm curious, and I learned a lot, and I strongly recommend the book, but it's not important. When I met Bruce, I had a 12-minute discussion with Bruce, the only one I ever had with him, and it went great. And at the end of 12 minutes, I said, listen, Bruce, I'm going to walk away now because I'm afraid if I talk to you any longer, you might say something that will interfere with my relationship with your art, and I can't let you do that. I can't take that risk. So the idea that Bruce is a rich man in a poor man's shirt, yeah, okay, fine, but it's not important. I mean, it's just people. You know, Chris Christie, in that stupid piece that Jeffrey Goldberg wrote, said that Bruce Springsteen was a hypocrite because he's so rich and yet he's singing about the lives of poor people. He's not reflecting his real life. His real life is in America that's given him great promise. Bruce recognizes the fact that not everybody gets to be Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah.
Right.
It reminds me of, I once read in Backstreet. The question was, how do you get Bruce Springsteen to play at your birthday party? And the answer was, be Bruce Springsteen, because he had just played at his birthday.
Well, this whole idea of him being a traitor to his class, which is essentially the argument, just drives me wild with rage. Because because it's like you don't have to be. First of all, I always want to know, okay, where exactly, where is the line, the economic line, where you are once you head north of that financially, you are no longer suited to talk about the working class. Like, is it $100,000 a year? Is it, that doesn't buy as much as it used to. Is it $1 million a year? But the idea is, just because you're wealthy doesn't mean you necessarily have to stop caring about the less fortunate people, or that your thoughts on how to try to, on what that experience is like, or how it might be changed. Lose all their validity.
No, Peter, I agree with you, and I think that it would be a great loss if we didn't have Springsteen's voice in our culture. But I think, to me, the question is, I don't know that it's necessarily an unfair, uninteresting question to ask whether or not he is living up to his own ideals that he's presenting in his songs, and he has enough money that he could do a lot more to sort of help the situation in America than he is.
But the thing is, we don't really know what he is and what he isn't doing. But
also, so could I.
Mm-hmm.
I've got some extra money too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and I'm not doing everything I can.
And it may be that he's giving away tens of millions of dollars every year, but we don't hear about it because he does it in the actual spirit of charity, which is that he doesn't make a big deal about it. He just, he's
but also the person, the individual Bruce Springsteen doesn't matter. What matters is the effect that his art has on the world, and also to some degree his politics. Less so than his art, but nevertheless true. The person who Bruce Springsteen is Patty's problem.
And I'm sure it's a big one. As a person who lives out the contradiction of being an Ivy League labor historian, I actually don't care about this. I mean, I'm sure he grapples with it on his own. For me, what was the line you quoted from the banker?
Oh yeah, the banker man grows fat and the poor man grows thin.
Right. The problem with that is not the contradictions that Bruce is rich. The problem is that's bad writing.
Yeah.
Oh, whatever. But the thing,
well, he was alluding to a Woody Guthrie line with that.
Plus, also, he's singing in the voice of a character. It's that's not Bruce Springsteen's construction of the world.
Johnny Cash didn't shoot a man in Reno just to watch him die.
Yeah, he was actually pissed off at that.
I mean that. he had I think there is a problem that he's lost his ear a little bit for the vernacular, and so that I think that might be a little bit of a problem. But the fact that he's loaded, God bless him. I don't know. I hope he does some good with it, but I'm not going to criticize him for it.
But I
And
still
by the
just-
way, I have. I mean, maybe these stories are made up, but there is some anonymous donation going on, and sometimes Bruce has given money to people on the condition that they never tell anyone that it was Bruce, and who knows how large that is. It could very well be larger than we have any idea.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's as good a place as any to wrap up. Do any of you guys have any final comments you'd like to make? Peter, would you like to say anything in closing?
Well, I just want to restate that I don't think Bruce has lost his touch with the vernacular. I think that as Jeff was saying about that one particular song, I think that was him writing in the voice of that character, and that guy is not like a sociologist or that guy's not a poet. That's just that guy talking and blowing off steam. But anyway,
I don't think that's how guys talk.
Whatever.
But I wonder though, leaving this small question aside, Bruce hasn't written that many great songs in a really long time. Like they're not pouring out of him the way they used to. I think that we don't say that very often.
Yeah, I actually, that's where I want to see him shake things up. I mean, I think Neil Young is the obvious analogy here, who has continued to experiment in different ways, and in which that I think something about Bruce keeps him from doing that, and I wish upon him a little more risk.
We don't think the Seeger Sessions album, and even to a certain extent Devils and Dust, were a little bit of a reach.
Yeah. No, I think the Seeger Sessions were a great idea, and I think they were loose and they were fun, and I was all for them.
Okay.
Plus, also, we don't know what he's doing today.
That's right.
I know he's been working on an album for years that's a complete departure from the type of music that he's done.
Great. That's great news.
Yeah. So, it's just kind of like, and also, he's one of those guys that has like 20 completed records in his archive that he just never released for whatever reason.
Right.
So it's like, yeah, I agree. It would be nice if stuff, if he put out a record that came completely out of left field. To me, that would be nice. But
I think I might have a good ending point on this conversation, because I think back to Eric Alterman's book, and he said, I think you're the one who says this, Eric, is that Bruce gave you a model of masculinity growing up, and he was always 10 or however many years ahead of you, and I kind of feel like I don't have that guy anymore who is sort of leading, providing an archetype for me, leading me forward, and that's a lot to ask of any artist. Believe me, I know, and I am deeply appreciative of everything Springsteen's provided for me. But boy, I do miss that sort of beacon in the future for me.
What do you think, Eric?
I think I'm going to let that one go.
Okay, well, Eric Alterman, Peter Ames Carlin, and Jefferson Cowie, thank you so much for joining me on the Soapbox to discuss Bruce Springsteen.
my pleasure.
Yeah, good fun.